because gone are the days where you're going to be in Nashville on Broadway and there's going to be a bunch of music industry professionals in the seats scouting out talent that's playing. So I always took the approach of let's really narrow this down and let's find the most appropriate venue with the best possible situation. So not only is it a win for them, but it's a win for us too.
Yeah. Live the life you love. What's going on, y'all? Today's guest is Rebecca Day. Rebecca is a singer-songwriter based in Jacksonville, Florida. She's also one half of the swampy Americana duo, the Crazy Daysies, which is a duo she started with her sister. And she's also the owner of the blog, the freemarketmusician.com. Rebecca Day does some really, really amazing things. This is such a fun conversation. We dive into her career as a DIY musician, how she has built up her touring career, or the group's touring career, through playing at wine bars and very creative ways of building a touring business through that method, right? Starting there and then building up from there into bigger and bigger venues. And they tour all over the Southeast. They make most of their living from touring. So we really dive a little bit into that world, but also ways that she had to pivot during the pandemic that really, really wiped out the touring industry, right? And then we do dive into some of the free market musician things that she writes about on her blog. Really, really amazing blog, the freemarketmusician.com. But basically what she talks about there is the liberty movement, what I've been really active and involved in over the past year, and really interested in learning about for years now. But in the last year, I've become very, very vocal, just as Rebecca has. She's become more and more vocal and outspoken on social media about free and open markets, about anarcho-capitalism, about Austrian economics, right? And explaining what all of those things mean and how those things can make our lives better. So we do get political on this episode. Just a small little disclaimer, but I really want to challenge y'all to stick around because Rebecca explains things really, really well. She really breaks it down really easily, right? And it's really just a lot of philosophy and economics that we talk about in this episode. And I feel like a lot of it is pretty common sense once you take an opportunity to listen. And she shares a lot of amazing resources if this is something you're interested in and want to learn more about. And we also share on how to make a living and how to make it as a DIY musician, and some of the coaches and things that she used, resources she used to learn about her music career and how to grow and improve her music career. So this was such a fun conversation. I hope y'all enjoyed as much as I did. We'll definitely have to get Rebecca back on for a round two and dive into some other interesting topics, such as record labels, which we talked about after we recorded. But to learn more about Rebecca Day, check out the freemarketmusician.com. You can also find her at Rebecca Day Music. And I'll throw all the links to everything, to all our social media platforms and everything, into the description of the YouTube channel, into the show notes for the episode. And speaking of the YouTube channel, if you're watching this video, all the links and everything will be in the description, as I mentioned. But also take a quick moment to subscribe to the podcast, wherever it is you're listening. And if you have a quick moment on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. They help us get more amazing guests such as Rebecca, and help us get a little bit up on the podcast ranks so we can bring more great content for all of y'all. I really appreciate you listening or watching wherever you're checking this out. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with the amazing Rebecca Day. All right, we are live. I'm excited to introduce everyone to Rebecca Day. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting to have a fellow Floridian and a fellow person in the Liberty movement on the show. It's really excited about that. Tell everyone a little bit about your backstory of your music career, how you got started in music, and where you're at now today in your music career.
For sure. So I've been a professional musician for about 10 years now, but I've always loved music, picked up a guitar early on, loved to sing, loved to write. My mom's a writer. My dad's a musician as well, so runs in the family. My aunt is a fellow musician. And so I was always exposed to music, all different kinds of music. So I fell in love with it early on. And along about 19, 20 years old, I was in college and I went to an art school for high school. I went to Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. So what was happening was when I got to college, because I went to such a great high school, I felt like I was kind of going through the same motions over and over again. And I was dying to start my professional music career. After much arguing with my parents, they finally were like, you know what, just do it.
You need to get a real job.
Right.
I know that story.
It was more so, we know how hard it can be. So just prepare yourself. You know, they wanted me to explore every avenue just to make sure, because it's a decision that, you know, you can't take lightly. And so when they kind of realized, look, I'm not going to let this thing go, you know, I've got to do it. They were like, we can't keep having the same conversation. Just do it, give it a year, see how it goes. And I was about 20 years old and I started playing shows and recording music and just kind of dove in, you know, head first. And it worked out. And 10 years later, I would not have it any other way. I love it. I love being an entrepreneur, and I love that it is my music and my art and my writing. And yeah, so that's kind of the what, you know, what happened from day one to now, the short of it.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. And do you have a team that you work with, or is it just you? I mean, you have a duo, the Crazy Daisies. Is it just the two of you working on everything, or do you have a team? Like, who does all the business stuff?
Yes, so that's me. I do all the bookings, all the social media, all of that kind of everything that goes with that. I take care of. I like it that way from two aspects. Number one, I started it that way because I really enjoyed developing personal relationships with the clients and the supporters that we have. I really love that when they call the number on my business card, they get me. They don't get someone who, you know, doesn't have that personal touch. So that was the first part of it. And then the second part is that I'm a bit of a control freak. So I don't know. I have a really hard time delegating. At the end of the day, I'm like, I'll just do it. Don't worry about it. It's like not necessarily the greatest thing, but that's the other part of it is I'm just kind of a control freak and have never been able to relinquish that to someone else.
I mean, you don't want some person answering the phone that's like really cold and then transfer that to an assistant to your agent, and maybe they can get the agent on the phone who never has time for anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really nuanced. The music industry, it's not like your standard business operation. It's highly nuanced, and it's a very like it's based on individuality, and you work with so many different personalities that if you separate yourself from that too much, you're not in it and you don't know what's going on, which can be really confusing and stressful. So I just really like, and I really love business. I mean, I'm a really left-brained artist. So I was at a CD Baby conference in 2016 and they asked a question, you know, everyone in the audience, you know, what is the percentage of time you spend on your art and what is the percentage of time you spend on your business? It's a really popular question that they ask, but it gets really interesting results. A lot of people in the audience said, well, I spend 90% of my time on the art. That's what I love. And then the last 10% on business. I wasn't 90% business, 10% art, but I was definitely 50-50, you know. As much as I love creating and songwriting, and all of that, which I absolutely love. I also love reading contracts and contract law and all of that weird crazy stuff. I love that too. So
That's too funny.
I'm a weirdo.
Are you familiar with Ari Herstand?
I love him.
Yeah. I mean, he talks about in his book about spending 50-50, right? And sometimes like some weeks it's maybe more music than business, and other weeks it's more business than music. But in general, it's about a 50-50 split of how you split up your time when you're a DIY musician.
Absolutely. And I read that, I think it's How to Make It in the New Music Industry is his book,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I read that several years ago when it first came out. I've been a long time follower of Ari's take. I
Yep.
love his website. And when I read that book, I had a couple revelations. Number one, that was in there, and I was really surprised at that remark, because I always felt a little guilty when I wasn't practicing, but I was working on a business side of it.
Right.
Like I was doing something wrong. But he made me realize, like, no, it's okay to be business minded, especially these days. It's almost a requirement now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So that was really cool. And the other thing that I found really revolutionary about his book was that he said, listen, as artists, gone are the days where you go in a studio, you record someone else's song, it gets released under your name, you tour, and then you take a few months off and you do it all over again.
Right.
It's no longer that cyclical thing. You really want to branch out and use all of your creativity, whether it's you're a musician and a writer, you're a musician and a videographer, but you want to not only use all of your creative outlets, but master all of them and incorporate all of them into your brand. So that was a really great thing to learn from his book too.
Yeah, so many good lessons in that book. And you've also mentioned the CD Baby DIY conference. I guess how, as there's so many elements of the music business. There's the booking side, the legal side. You've mentioned already so many different things, and there's the marketing side, the publishing and copyright. I mean, there's so much to do. How did you learn all this stuff? Like, what are some of your favorite resources that you like sharing with other musicians?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say the one word answer to how did I learn all that is I read. I'm a reading. So I'm a huge reader. I love reading, and I also love taking courses. There are amazing courses out there, and each of those different areas you mentioned, I studied really intensely for like several months to master that side of things in order to execute properly. So for the music publishing side of things, Michael Elsner, I'm not sure if you're, yeah. So he has a great course for licensing your music. And within that course, there's a lot about music publishing, because he's like, if you're going to license your own music to TV, film, video games, advertising companies, you've got to understand music publishing. And it's kind of like the Wild West of the music industry. So I picked up several books on music publishing that he recommended, and there's really great ones out there. Like one Amazon search for music publishing comes up just great resources. So I read several books. I took his course, and from there I was able to I wouldn't say administer, but own the masters to my music and all of those things, and understand like what a publishing admin is as opposed to a music library owning your music, all of those different things. But really reading, just anything I can get my hands on, or any course I can afford to take. That's what, so education.
Yeah. What are some other courses that you took?
So let's see, definitely the Michael Elsner course. Most recently, I've taken a couple of different booking courses early on. The Ultimate Touring course, Nancy Moran, she's in Nashville, and is really well known in the music publishing circles. But her and her husband did a course, like the Ultimate Touring and Booking course, I believe is what it's called. I think they still do it. This was several years ago. But that went in line with a book written, I forget the author, but it's How to Be Your Own Booking Agent. Which is still like a go-to resource for a lot of musicians. That course and that book kind of went hand in hand and taught you that the traditional ways of touring, which used to be you had a booking agent and they would book you out, 5 cities surrounding the major city first. And then when you got your following, they got you in the major cities. it's like, it's a great strategy, but for a lot of independent musicians, those traditional strategies don't work. So what
Right.
they did was they had a great strategy of, all right, what's your niche? Like, what is your really unique draw?
Mm-hmm.
And build a potential list of venues off of that and work on those personal relationships. And it might be like, so you have a following that is really into like the art community.
Mm-hmm.
So target art galleries.
Right. Yeah.
Do a cool show in an art gallery and make an art gallery tour, you know.
I love it.
Yeah, so it's just creative things like that. And the first tour we did, it was a Southeastern tour, and this was several years ago. I've kind of gotten out of the touring bug. Like when I first started, I was like, we got to tour, we got to tour, we got to tour. But then you fall out of love with touring after you do it a few times. It's like theater. Like you fall out of love with theater when it's your 20th show of the same exact thing and the 20th consecutive night. So, but our first tour we did was we went off really great in wine bars. We were a sister duo. We played country music, acoustic. It just went really well.
Mm-hmm.
We did a wine bar tour all throughout Florida, which was really, really fun.
So what was your approach reaching out to these wine bars? Because are these wine bars that are already doing music, or are these wine bars where you're like reaching out and saying, hey, like, are you interested? Like, would you be interested in having live music? Like, how does this whole conversation and figuring out the route and work?
Right. Great question. It's, once again, I'm going to use the word nuance. It's a nuanced thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a couple of resources I found early on that were really helpful for booking tours. Specifically, Reverb Nation has a great listing of venues within their platform, or at least they did when I was utilizing it. Like I mentioned, it was quite a few years ago at this point. But they had a great venue listing that you could filter. You could filter by state, all these different things. So I filtered out Florida and just went through the list. It was kind of like I put my researcher hat on and just went through the list, and I picked out, you know, I probably had a list of close to 50 venues via Reverb Nation. And then what I also did was I researched alternative magazines throughout Florida. There's, you know, like in Jacksonville, Folio Weekly. There's Weekly. all these different great alternative magazines that generally do venue listings because they have music and they list the artists. So I researched those, circled appropriate venues. Then I vetted them, because there's this old school mentality that I've heard that states, all right, when you're an up and coming musician, you want to play for anybody, everybody, anywhere, anytime. And it's like, whoa.
Horrible advice.
I don't know.
Kind of.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you don't want to play in front of just the bartender and door person and sound guy.
Oh, right.
That's not fun.
Oh my goodness, I've earned my stripes with a couple of those. But for me, I was always coming at that from a marketing standpoint, because gone are the days where you're going to be in Nashville on Broadway and there's going to be a bunch of music industry professionals in the seats scouting out talent that's playing. So I always took the approach of, let's really narrow this down and let's find the most appropriate venue with the best possible situation. So not only is it a win for them, but it's a win for us too.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. And so that was the approach I took. And it was successful for us. We did a bigger tour after that, where we went into Georgia. We had a couple South Carolina dates. We've kept it really Southeastern. I love performing in the Southeast. Like it's just my favorite. So we really kept it Southeastern. But that was really a big part that set it off for us, was just researching and vetting and calling up the venue, leaving a message. If they don't return your call, wait a little bit, call them back. And if they're not interested, that's okay, because the beautiful thing about the live music industry is it is very free market oriented. There is a lot of competition. So for every one venue that turns you down, there's going to be 5 that book you if you're good.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. The thing I like about playing the wine bars is, one, it's probably a lot more intimate, more personal, right? You have a better connection with the audience. There's an artist that I've had on podcasts that I love, just her strategy is Shannon Curtis. I don't know if you're familiar with her,
I
but
love her. Yes.
she plays nothing but house concerts and
Mhm.
has basically does her entire year in just 4 months. Like her entire year's revenue comes from 4 months of playing house concerts. And it's just such a good strategy. It's about knowing your audience, knowing the right type of venue to play. And I don't know what your strategy is. It sounds like you're also playing bigger venues too. I love using strategies like yours or the house concert strategy, and then use that to build up, right? So if you're playing in, I don't know, Sarasota, Florida, and you have 20 people at a wine bar, and then you play a house concert in Sarasota, Florida for another 20 people. Now maybe you can play in a small venue that holds 100 and start filling that up. Then once you build that up, you can go to a 200 cap room and so on. I love using like that strategy of starting small and then building up from there versus playing the cool venue in town and having nobody show up.
Right, for sure. And I think every artist has been there. I think even I saw Ari Herstand had a comment one time. He did a big show in California and it was really successful,
Mhm.
tons of people. But he posted a thank you picture, like thank you for everyone for coming out. And there was a comment from a woman that said, "Oh, I had no idea you were playing a concert, or I would have come." And his response was dagger to the heart. And that's so true,
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, you are constantly promoting, but you don't want to over promote because that's
Mhm.
annoying,
Yeah.
And so I definitely, with our approach, we went where we had that fire going, right?
Mhm.
We struck, where the iron was hot, and we knew that smaller venues like wine bars loved, it was a great fit.
Mhm.
We knew that earlier slots at festivals,
Mhm.
great fit.
Mhm.
From there,
That's interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
yeah, absolutely.
usually an artist wants to play as close to the headliner as possible at a festival at the biggest stage possible. But it's such an interesting thought that you want to play earlier on a festival. Why is that?
Right. Let me tell you.
Tell me.
So I know we've played the later slots. Those are great. We're of course thankful when that happens. But I really like the earlier slots because you still have a ton of people.
Hmm.
They haven't imbibed too much yet, so they're still kind of sane.
Yep.
And then you don't get done so late, so you're not dragging the next day for inevitably yet another show.
Right.
I'm very I kind of, so this is going to be a really weird analogy, but bear with me. So there, in professional football, there was an owner of the 49ers, famous owner,
Mm.
Eddie DeBartolo Jr., who took an approach with his team of giving them not only the best of the best, like separate hotel rooms for each player, first class in the plane, but he made sure that they got rest,
Yeah.
that they ate really well, like really nutritious food,
Mhm.
that they did not party the night before a game. It was a really different kind of world for the 49ers and a lot of the
Mhm.
other teams. But what they saw was, because of that mentality, they outperformed
Yep.
everyone. They had a great camaraderie. They trusted their leader. So I have in my band and in my group, the different setups that we have, I have musicians that play with me who are mothers and fathers,
Mhm.
wives, husbands. They have family commitments. So I make sure to honor that as much as I can,
Mhm.
because I understand how important that is. So if
Absolutely.
there's a 1 p.m. slot at a festival where we're still in front of a ton of people, but we're done by 3, as opposed to it's 10 p.m., everyone's wasted in the
Yeah.
crowd and it's mayhem, and we get done at midnight.
Right.
I'm gonna probably take the 1 p.m. slot,
Mhm.
because so far our success has not been stymied by which slot that we choose. And
Mhm.
because we're an acoustic based act, a lot of times they want us earlier.
Right.
And we're totally like, we've done a ton of opening slots for headliners at various venues. I love the opening slot.
Mhm.
I
Well,
love it.
it
It's
also gives you an opportunity to mingle with the crowd a little bit more, and then they remember you right away. Because if you're playing the last slot, you're breaking down, you don't have an opportunity to go talk to people. They're drunk and they're trying to leave and go home, and it's such a good strategy, I guess, a good way to think about it, because yeah, it does provide a lot of opportunities, and you can get home in time and get in bed in time.
exactly. If you're traveling, you love the fact that you're after an earlier slot at a festival, you're traveling back home. If you've got a 2 hours travel time, you're going to get home around dinner time, as opposed to, when it's 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. and you're already thinking about, all right, we've got this show coming up and
Right.
we've got to do this. It's just, I try and make our lives as stress-free as possible
I love it.
because of all of the variables that already come with our career and the industry we're in. So
Mhm.
if there's a way for me to make it a little less stressful, that's just going to create morale for us and have us all play better together. And it's going to help me be a better business person. And it's a win-win all around.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So there's many different ways to, I guess, make a living as a DIY musician. What is it that you all do? Like, what's your, I guess you don't have to go into specific numbers, but like, what are your revenue streams? Like, how are you able to do music full time?
Yeah, that's another really great question. So for me personally, I make the majority of my income as an independent artist via live performances.
Mhm.
We do get royalties, and I do have our business set up so that if there is a royalty we are owed, we're going to get it.
Right.
But you're quite aware of the debate with streaming
Mhm.
and all of that. And we've had some small micro syncs. A video game about a year ago licensed some of our music, which was really cool.
Mhm.
We've had some different like publications use our music with promo materials. So we've had some success with micro syncs. I always tell people who ask me, I'm playing all these shows, or I've been playing shows for however long, and I want to, kind of get out of that and transition a little bit. There is a ton of money to be made in the TV film licensing world with musicians, but it is probably the toughest nut to crack out of everything.
It is,
I
yeah.
don't even know if I've cracked it. I have like a game plan,
Right.
but a lot of times it can really be the luck of the draw with that. And I don't do super well with the luck of the draw scenarios.
Mhm.
I like to go where I know if I put the work in, I'm going to get results.
Yeah.
And thus far, where I've gotten the results, if I put the work in, is live shows.
Mhm.
And it just so happens that I really love performing live. I cannot stand recording. Our producer that we've done a lot of projects with here in town, you ask him, I can't sit still and be quiet, and it's very like I love the live music aspect of it. So I'm lucky and blessed because where I make the majority of our income, I also love doing it.
Right.
But that's just my personal experience. There's been a lot of people who have had a lot of success with licensing, or they have had a lot of success with streaming. But for us, the streaming payments we get, they don't offer enough cash flow for us to not put performances on the calendar on
Right.
a regular basis.
For sure. And then how did the pandemic affect y'all? I mean, luckily in Florida, we opened up a lot sooner, but how long were you not able to play? And then once things started opening back up, like where did you play? Because like I know some of the clubs that do original music, like 1904 Music Hall in Jacksonville or Jackrabbits, like they weren't doing shows for a little bit longer than maybe, I don't know, like a beach bar or something like that. I'm absolutely not sure what opened first in Jacksonville, but here was mostly like the restaurants and bars that opened up, and then the venues opened up a little later. So how did it all affect you, and how'd you pivot during that time?
That's actually the perfect word to use, pivot, because that I used that throughout 2020.
Yeah, the year to
And
pivot.
if you're like a Friends fan, you know the episode
Yeah,
where Ross is like pivot, pivot. So
yeah,
that was our buzzword for
that's
all
funny.
of 2020 was pivot. So that's what we did have to do for close to a year, from I would say March 2020 to March 2021. Actually, yeah. For exactly a year. Um, and it was so crazy. I will say that we were luckier than a lot of the bigger musicians who had to cancel tours,
Yeah.
and then who were at the mercy of these really big venues who had a lot more red tape to get through than these smaller venues.
Hmm.
Did we actually shook out better because we play the smaller venues.
Hmm.
But I will say that the day everything shut down here in Jacksonville, it was Friday the 13th. It was March
Oh,
13th,
really?
2020. Yes. Um, and I generally have great Friday the 13th. So I was just kind of blindsided.
Yeah.
It's a running joke that like I have good luck on Friday the 13th. But so I had actually just done my taxes that day too. So it was just a whirlwind. But I literally got just call after call after call in a matter of a 30-minute span. And our calendar in 2020 went from being booked about, 6 months in advance to gone.
Wow.
No bookings, none whatsoever. So I pivoted just through sheer willpower of, look, I gotta make money. The bills aren't gonna stop, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to shut down my business. So those expenses aren't going to stop either. So I did a contract work with a marketing firm here in town for about a year,
Okay.
which was a great, interesting experience. And I was super appreciative, so thankful. And so I did a ton of contract work for them. But I kept my business going, and for several months we didn't perform at all. But like I mentioned before, we were a lot better off than these musicians in these huge venues, because the second things did start opening up, we started getting calls and texts and emails. And we work with venues who did it in a common sense way, left plenty of room. We work with a lot of outdoor venues. So we're on
good.
outdoor patios and stages, and there's plenty of room. So we felt very comfortable, we weren't packed into some kind of little hole in the wall, room, festering. So we were so fortunate the way everything shook out, because it was just, for a lot of those bigger artists, my heart was just breaking for them, because they would write about it on Facebook. And what I think a lot of people didn't take into account when they look at musicians, these guys have families, they have babies, they have all of the responsibilities everyone else has. They're not some kind of, guy with a pipe dream, getting drunk every night, just like playing whatever. These are businessmen,
Right. Yeah.
So
Very
I think
professional.
that was really lost in translation.
Yeah, it's crazy how, I don't know. I guess this is a good decent transition into some of the Liberty and the Free Market Musician blog. But what are your thoughts on how the music industry handled the pandemic? Because I'm very, very disappointed in how the industry handled it. You have a few players that's, I mean, what is it I call it in the classroom? It's an oligopoly. There's a few companies that control the entire industry. And those companies decided to just abide by CDC guidelines, which were probably highly politicized and probably some kind of agenda there. At least that's what it seems like now, a year later. At least that's how I'm interpreting everything. And they shut down the entire touring industry. I mean, thousands of jobs lost, and thousands of people that have decades worth of experience not coming back and bringing that experience now to other industries. So I feel like it hurt the music industry overall more than it then it helped the music industry. Over something that I don't know, there wasn't really any science to back up the science they were claiming to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an answer. I'm going to be quite frank. It was handled horribly.
Horrible,
And
yeah.
and I say that from a philosophical standpoint, because I always tell people I'm not in it for the politics.
Mhm.
That's a complete waste of time for me. If you look at it from a purely philosophical standpoint, you had an entire industry that buckled against a few people who
Yeah.
said, no, you're not allowed to go make a living and feed your family.
Yeah.
Crazy. So that's just completely irrational, because if we as humans are not allowed to wake up every day and have the right to feed our families and to provide for ourselves, then we literally have adopted a philosophy that is anti-human.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, and you know this, the entertainment industry is largely an echo chamber.
Mm.
They all love to echo what the other is saying for a chance of 15 minutes of fame, for a chance for people to comment about how virtuous they are. And it's just all one big show. And I don't want to come off sounding negative, because that, if we get into the nitty-gritty of it and we just beat it down, it's a waste of time as well.
Yeah.
But I definitely was very, very happy to be in Florida during 2020, when everything was when it was happening, because because the people I work with, we all led from a principle of reason. We did not get emotional about it. We did not let fear control us. And because Florida, at least the circles I run in, is full of very self-reliant, independent people, through, like I mentioned earlier, sheer willpower, we got through it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you reflect on it and you wonder, how did I? Just because of everything that was stacked against us, we came out of the pandemic, right? And in March 2020, March 2021, things kind of started opening up here. Well, immediately I start hearing about PROACT, about all of this craziness that they're trying to throw on artists after a year, where many musicians sold their equipment and got a 9-to-5, not because they wanted to, but because that was the only option they had to keep feeding their families. Many venues didn't make it through it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because they were bad venues. They were great venues run by great people. But when you have a few people who, like I said, are allowed to tell people that you literally cannot go out on your own and make money to feed your family, you have an anti-human philosophy, and that is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's like, how dare does someone tell someone that needs to feed their family and has a career that they've built up for years, or has a small business they started? How dare does someone tell them they're not essential? I mean,
Exactly.
everyone's career is essential to them. And I mean, we're in the music industry, and music is essential to life. I mean, people love. I mean, I've heard so many people are not even in the music industry tell me they cannot wait to go see live music, because they just need to get out of the house. They need to express that joy and release of all the stress that they've had over the past year, and they just want to see some live music. And yeah, and we were told we're not essential.
For sure. I think one of the first posts I made after lockdowns started was, never let anyone tell you you're not essential.
Yeah.
What a scary notion to think that because the people that were telling us we're not essential would never deem themselves unessential.
Oh yeah, and they got paychecks.
They stayed essential the entire time.
Yeah.
So it's just ludicrous. And to your point about the importance of music, and especially live music,
Mm-hmm.
I totally feel you on that. When our calendar disappeared, when all our bookings disappeared, we started doing live streams like a lot of musicians,
Mm-hmm.
and we would do them weekly.
Yeah.
Same time, same day, every week.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a healing moment for not only us, but everyone who tuned in. It was a healing moment for everyone to be able to log in, listen to some live music, connect with each other, connect
Mm-hmm.
with us, and have a moment where someone isn't telling you that you literally have to fear everything and everyone around you.
Yeah.
And it was a bright spot every week in an otherwise really, really dim time period. And the second things started opening up here, I mean, everyone was so excited, coming out to the shows, and they expressed how important it was
Mm-hmm.
to them, which a lot of times when you talk about, and this is going to get a little into economics a little bit, but when you have people, especially like in Austrian economics, talk about the hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's food and transportation and all of these different needs people have to acquire all the time. The arts are seldom mentioned. That's not a knock on them at all. That's normal. Like that's how it should be in a hierarchy of needs conversation with economics. However, what I did notice that during everything was on that system, that grading system of hierarchy of needs, however you want to classify it, music was, I think, a lot higher than people realize.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool. Really cool.
That is cool. I love that. And I have a theory. I'll be curious what your thoughts are. And based on some of the blog posts you've written, I believe you have a similar theory. So as we've talked about throughout this conversation, musicians are very busy, right? Especially if you're doing the music and the business side. There's not really much time for learning about politics, let's say. And most people, after they're done doing their music stuff, they're hanging out with their friends, they're hanging out with their families, they're watching Netflix, whatever. They're entertaining themselves because they just had an exhausting workday. So most musicians aren't really, and I don't mean that as a knock on the music industry, but most people in the music industry are not really well informed when it comes to politics. They are mostly like headline readers. And as you mentioned, they like to get their 5 minutes of fame by like agreeing to some kind of headline. But my theory is, I believe that most of the music industry is way more libertarian and free market thinking than they actually know they are. Because I mean, to cut someone's hair or to braid someone's hair, you need a license. You don't need a license to be a musician. You don't need a license to be a artist manager. You don't need a license to start a publishing company or a record label or be a producer. There's so many careers within the music industry that don't require a license, not even a certification or a degree. So like anyone can just start. And I've worked a lot in the hip hop world, and you cannot tell me that at least 90% of those rappers are not libertarian, because the way I see them hustle, selling tickets, selling CDs out of backpacks, selling shirts out of backpacks, and the kind of money they make, and allowing anyone to touch that money that they make, that they've hustled and worked so hard for, is not even a conversation starter. So I feel like the free market mindset and the libertarian spirit lives within the music industry, and most people don't even know that it does.
Yeah, and that's a great theory. I definitely see that. A lot of anecdotal evidence. I see that quite often. And I feel like part of the issue as to why they're not more obviously around is you have a lot of silencing and censorship going on with, I mean, shadow banning, if we just want to really nitpick, is just one of the myriad things that big tech, uses, the industry, the arts entertainment industry uses.
Mm-hmm.
If you say one wrong thing, that could mean the absolute end of your career.
Mm-hmm.
And while independent artists have more freedom than, say, a major label artist, a lot of independent artists still, if presented with a major label deal, would take it.
Right.
So they also want to proceed with a bit of caution.
Mm-hmm.
They may have these principles and this mindset of liberty, but they might not want to maybe pigeonhole themselves. I know for a while that's why I wasn't super outspoken, was because I was afraid that if I started saying like, no, this is a terrible philosophy to adopt, no, we shouldn't make it harder for musicians to make money or to keep the money that they make, we already have enough stacked up against us. A lot of times I didn't say anything because I was afraid that would pigeonhole me into a political artist, which I never would want to be, because the second you start talking partisan politics, everyone loses.
Yeah.
If you keep it about philosophy and economics and unrevisionist history, that's where you win. That's where you create individual change that ultimately adds up to a more liberty-minded society. And that's been proven. So that's why I actually didn't say a whole lot for a while. And finally, in 2020, I just got so tired of being the one to keep my mouth shut while everyone else got to just gab away.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I did it in a way that is very reasoned. I don't get into these aggressive arguments on Twitter like a lot of people do. I just don't have the energy.
Right.
I want to keep it. We can have a discussion, but I'm not going to get into a tit for tat thing. I'm busy.
Yeah. Busy.
So I feel like there are a lot of artists and industry professionals I've met. I work with, I would say the majority of people I work with are very liberty minded, and they're individualists. I think that's a really important part of who they are as people, is they are individualists. And if you're an individualist, everything from there that falls after that is liberty minded. So I'm really fortunate to get to work with a ton of liberty minded people in the industry. But I totally agree with you. There's a ton of artists who are liberty minded, who want to keep the money that they make, who better invest the money that they make if they get to keep it, and better give it away to charities and to people who need it. And it's of their own choosing. So I definitely agree with you.
So was it 2020 where you started really speaking up? Because for me, with the podcast, being in the music industry, also being a professor, it's scary to speak up, because professors getting fired from schools for speaking against the mainstream narrative. And I've gotten a lot of heat on my Facebook page for starting to speak up, but there just came a point last year where I just said it's enough. Like I can't take it anymore. And it's funny, the more I learn, so I really started diving into the space, and like the more I learn about it, the more almost like upset I get. I'm like, man, we just need to get rid of all of it. It's leading me more and more towards anarchist, but not diving into that rabbit hole now. But
it's okay, dive in that rabbit hole.
but yeah, I just really had enough, and I came to a point where I reached out to where I thought I could interview someone that's kind of big in the liberty space. They actually said yes. Jane Hazel was on the podcast. Didn't realize how big of a deal that was until a little bit later when I got more involved in the movement. But I call him my political mentor. And in the beginning, I also kind of follow some things that he does on Twitter all the time. I'm like, okay, this brings me nothing. I need to stop telling my local official to go F themselves.
Right.
But where was I going this rabbit hole? So I guess, was it last year that you finally started speaking up, and then what challenges and opportunities did that bring for you?
Yes. So there's a lot to unpack with
Yeah.
what you just said, and I'm excited about it.
Awesome.
And yeah, so last year, 2020, I saw a post from Tom Woods, who I adore.
Yeah.
And I adore from a standpoint of I have great respect for him and his mind. And he had a post on Facebook, and he highlighted a New York classical musician who literally was, I mean, as hard as it is for a secular artist, right, or an artist that plays popular type music, imagine a classical artist where their career is heavily involved in state funding. He had no hope left at the moment. And Tom put up a note about artists, musicians out there, you know, now's the time to speak up. If you don't speak up now, what's going to happen a year from now, 2 years from now, if you stay in silence? You know, that this is a point, we're at a crossroads here. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I was already in that headspace just from everything. But I saw a couple people put up posts like that, and it really gets you thinking. And I've always had I've always been someone who just believes in justice, and believes that should be priority number one. Yeah. And so I got to thinking about personally, if I don't speak up, what that would do to me, which would mean I'm living in a very inauthentic way. And I can't do that. And so that's kind of where I started the free market musician and all that. But I will say it wasn't this overnight thing. I didn't just see the Tom Woods post and be like, oh yeah, okay. This was a years and years in the making. I got into anarcho-capitalism, since you mentioned anarchy. And you may hear some thunder in the background. Sorry about that. It's, that's okay. Kind of storming here. But so several years ago, I got into anarcho-capitalist writers and thinkers, because the big names in that school of thought, from definitely Murray Rothbard, but also Ludwig von Mises, he's a big name. The things that they were talking about, writing about, really struck a chord with me, because they are liberty minded, they are individualist minded, and they're voluntarists. So they believe in zero coercion. Yeah. And what's not to like about that? What is not to like about a philosophy which says every single human interaction should be voluntary? There should never be one that is coerced. Right. That's just a great, like, I feel like that's the philosophy most people adopt when they step out of the door. Yeah. It's like, hey, I'm not gonna, aggress you. You don't aggress me. We're cool. Right. If it wasn't that way, we would not be able to go and run down to the store and pick up a jug of milk and come home and be okay. Yeah. So I really got into that philosophy. And a lot of people, when I would put things up on Facebook, while I had a lot of people who loved the things dealing with voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism, there were also a lot of people who immediately, upon any mention of the word anarchy, would assume that anarchy means Marxism, because that's what the news tells you. Right. Yeah. The news tells you anytime there's a group of kids that destroy property, well, those are anarchists. Yeah. They've never read a book by a true anarchist in their entire life. And yet they're telling the population, this is anarchy. So this is a new speak situation happening that's very Orwellian, because the majority of anarchists, and it's on a spectrum, right? Sure. But the majority of anarchists believe in zero coercion and voluntarism in all your relationships. Well, that is something that the state could never do, because they have terrible ideas. So they have to force their ideas,
Yep.
right? But good ideas don't require force.
Yep.
So I actually got some pushback early on, and I just put my head down and kept reading and kept analyzing and kept reflecting. And after about 10 years, come 2020,
Mm-hmm.
when I said enough is enough, I felt educated enough to be confident in launching the Free Market Musician and being outspoken on my social media and having these conversations. I guess the other side, or everyone else, gets to be outspoken. So why shouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So we named a few things that I haven't had anyone name on the podcast before. So just for like the listeners, if they're still tuned in and they're saying they're making some really good points. Where do I start? How do I learn more about what they're talking about? Where would you recommend to start? And I mean, we mentioned Jane Ailey. He always talks about like not right away sending people to Ludwig von Mises or talking about the non-aggression principle, because you're gonna just lose people right away. So he has like an article he likes to share, which the John Taylor Gatto article. For the title of it, it's like 7 Rules of Life or Teaching or something like that. But famous teacher from New York, and he wrote this blog post that he suggests as a really good place to start with teachers and people in the education space. So I guess where would you suggest a musician or somebody in the music business start to learn about this stuff?
Well, that's a really awesome question. I love that question. And like you said, I have major love for Murray Rothbard,
Yeah.
Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, all those amazing philosophical and economics writers. But that's a good question. So what I would say, a life-changing book I read a while ago, but that is very popular and is a great introduction to voluntarist thought, to the thought of human flourishing, a philosophy of human flourishing, is Henry David Thoreau, Civil Disobedience.
Okay.
Perfect introduction to the philosophy behind what everything else is built on. And that is civil non-compliance of not only regulations and mandates, but a philosophy that is anti-human, that is against human flourishing. And the way he talks about it and details it is not only brilliant, but really, really easy to grasp for anyone. So I would start there, but I would say this, and this is how I'm wired, but this is, well, let me take a step back, because I gotta also mention my girl, Ayn Rand. So you have to also, if you want to, I keep mentioning human flourishing. What philosophy isn't the absolute pinnacle of human flourishing other than objectivism, which is the philosophy she created? So you must read, I would honestly start with The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and actually read her books before you believe what you may have learned in school about her. I went to an art school and somehow learned really good things about her in school, which is weird. But so read The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. Anthem is her novella that is another great introduction into this philosophy of liberty and individualism. So her novella, Anthem, is amazing. But once you read those and you get these introductions, the best thing you could do is dive into these bigger works. You don't have to read them all at one time. Human Action, Mises' Human Action, is going to take you forever it's huge.
Yeah.
So, which is great. Like, I think there's this common misconception with books that the second you pick up a book and like 3 days later you should be done.
Yeah.
Books are meant to be studied, not just digested.
I love that. Books are meant to be studied.
Yeah. So dive into Murray Rothbard, dive into his book on America's Great Depression and see all the truth in there. Dive into Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. Dive into The Road to Serfdom by Hayek. And then I cannot recommend enough Mises Institute.
Yes.
Go on to Mises Institute and look at all of the information available for free, I might add, for free, which is great how liberty works. Isn't it great how that works when you're not coercing people to give them your money, that they just give more freely? Isn't that fabulous? So Mises Institute is another great resource as well.
Awesome. I love that. Those are all really good things. And Mises Institute has a really good introduction to Austrian economics, which is another term you've mentioned, and the people that may have not heard before, but it kind of explains to you how, like, in a very easy, fun way, with these kind of cartoon videos on how Austrian economics works. And I have a production finance course this summer that starts in summer B, and
Nice.
I'm gonna try to sprinkle in a little bit of Austrian economics into that course.
That would be so fun. Yes.
Yeah. And you being in this space now as a musician, like, I guess, what kind of challenges has it created, and what kind of maybe opportunities came from it? Because I've heard that the way I found out about you was Tom Woods actually mentioned you on his podcast. And I was like, oh, I gotta check out who this Rebecca Day is. And that's a pretty big endorsement, having Tom Woods speak up for you in this world. So I guess, what opportunities and challenges has this route created for you?
Yeah. So interestingly, it's created nothing but opportunity. It has been nothing but a positive experience. There have been a few people on Twitter, troll type people, but that's not something that's just unique to me. Everyone, I think, experiences that on Twitter if you've got something of importance to say. So it's just been nothing but a wonderful experience. And I think it speaks to the brand I've developed over the years. Not only the supporters I have, but the people in the Austrian economics circles are really welcoming. They're intellectual from the sense of they love to not only share knowledge, but learn new things. And so the kind of the niche I've kind of not only, I would say, I guess, developed for my brand specifically, but that I'm a part of, has been super welcoming, and it's been a great experience thus far. That may change. Never know. But so far it's been really great.
Yeah. And the big thing I always talk about, right, is trying to be your most authentic self when you're an artist, and doing things that are authentic to you, right? So does every artist need to go and get politically active? Absolutely not. But if it's something that you're interested in, and it is maybe a different school of thought, maybe it is, more of libertarian thought, maybe it is more conservative, I want to challenge artists not to be afraid to speak up. I mean, yes, it's scary. Will I get canceled? Will I lose opportunities? Will I lose a tour? Will I lose an opportunity of a record deal? Right? There's a lot of people out there that appreciate people speaking up, and especially in the libertarian space. I can't talk too much about, like, the conservative world, but in the libertarian space, if you are real and you're authentic and you just dive in and start engaging and interacting with people there, that's such an amazing community. I mean, probably would have given up Twitter a long time ago, but because of this world, I mean, I've met so many amazing people through Twitter, and I don't have to go debate with my local congresswoman anymore. I can now just engage with people like you and Shane and Brian Nichols. It's such an amazing community that I've met through Twitter and this libertarian space.
Absolutely. And I would say too, to any artist or anyone in any business or industry out there who is afraid to speak out because of the repercussions, whether it's I'm going to lose my job, or, I'm going to get banned from a social media outlet, or I'm going to lose a record deal. The second that we don't speak out because we're afraid to lose that is the second that they not only win, but are even more emboldened with their agenda. And there's a part of The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. There's a scene in that book, the protagonist, Howard Roark, who I've just, if he's like, if you could put me in a character, it's him. He's the most amazing artistic character ever written. and he's an architect, but he's an architect that refuses to sell out to the popular trends and to this collectivist thought that we often see in the music industry. He's not going to sell out. His big thing is my work done my way, and I don't have clients so I can build. I build to have clients. So those are his two big things. And you take those two things, and those go against everything we ever learn as artists many times in school. So what he has is this very, very hard journey to not only build, but to like make money to survive. So there's a scene where he ends up back at a rock quarry, because he's the type of architect that's had every single job possible associated with his profession, which is an important aspect to his character. He ends up at a rock quarry working there. And there's sometimes in this industry, in this journey, that if it's at a moment when I'm in a valley instead of a peak, and I go, I'm in my rock quarry right now. Yeah. So don't be afraid to go in your rock quarry. Don't be afraid of that, because the second that you are afraid of that rock quarry, then they're controlling you. You're not controlling yourself. And if you're an artist, you need autonomy, or else you will create crappy art. And that history shows that. And I have a really popular tweet. I said, art adhering to censorship is terrible. That's why we sit around and we talk about Orwell, and we talk about all these people whose manuscripts were burned by the state and were banned. We don't sit around talking about their minions that they loved. Right. We sit around talking about the ones that went against them. And that's so important to understand.
I always joke that's the reason why rock and roll is dead, because they stopped speaking out against the establishment.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so many good things there. I lost my train of thought now with this little Rage Against Machine joke that
I love them.
I love them too. I love their music, but I'm very, very disappointed how they're handling the pandemics. They're basically just obeying to whatever the government's saying, and it's like, what happened to F you? I won't do what you tell me. Like,
I know. Oh gosh, that's like one of my favorite songs. I love that song, and I jokingly quote it sometimes, you know. However, I think their philosophy, because I've read quite a bit about them, and even though they had this anarchist philosophy, it geared towards anarcho-communism. Yeah. And anytime you learned that too. Right? Anytime you have communism, you're going to have state intervention. I mean, it can't work without it, except in these very small vacuums. Maybe a voluntary communist, thing would work. But generally, that requires the heaviest of state intervention. So it's kind of natural that they would be gearing towards just kind of complying. Unfortunately, a lot of the anarchists out there from earlier music, I think, did gear themselves more towards anarcho-communism. So a lot of people assume that's the only kind of anarchism there is. Right. They don't realize there's anarcho-capitalism, that there's voluntarism, agorism, and all those counter economics that don't deal with communism at all, but deal in purely voluntary societies.
Is there, for those listening, is there an easy way to, I guess, explain the difference between anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-communism? Because those are definitely terms that have never been mentioned on the podcast before.
Lots of firsts today.
I love it. Yeah. and that's with me taking risks and starting to expand out beyond just music business and marketing.
I love that. I love that, and I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. And I would say, so it's still highly debated about the exact definitions of these things. I would say that the biggest difference to me, I come at everything from an economic standpoint, and definitely a theory standpoint. And with anarcho-communism, unless you have, like I mentioned before, this very small vacuum where it can exist, the second you start building out a society and it gets bigger and bigger, if you have a communist mindset, well, let's go back to what communism is. And in its most popular form, it's Marxism. Yeah. And so you have this very classist system, and you have this rage against capital, and kulaks. Even you have just your middle class entrepreneurs with a farm. Oh, we don't like you anymore.
Yeah.
So because of the Marxist approach within that, you have a lot of violence, and you have a lot of jealousy, which is very dangerous. And so the biggest difference with anarcho-communism and anarcho-capitalism is when you swing over from that to anarcho-capitalism is you have the free market. And that is an unbridled free market on top of everything else that flows underneath it. So you have everything is voluntary. You have preferably a stateless society, and a lot of people freak out over that because they've been so ingrained with government. What they don't realize is with anarcho-capitalism, it doesn't necessarily mean there would not be things that pop up that are governing bodies and such. It just means that this state that is authoritarian and just ever growing, this monster, as Nietzsche put it, the state is the coldest of all monsters. You don't have that,
right?
Because they don't believe in coercion, and anarcho-capitalism stems from anarchist philosophy that is about a way of life. People often look at these things from a political standpoint. You have to almost look at anarcho-communism from a political standpoint, because communism is political.
Right.
But the great thing about anarcho-capitalism is you can look at it from a philosophical perspective, and that the anarchist thought behind it's a way of life. And every time you go out, and I tell people often new to this subject matter, when you go outside and you go to a store and you buy something, and then you come home and it was successful, that's an anarchy example. I was in traffic the other day and a wreck happened, and one of the cars stalled. So several people got out and worked with one of the drivers to push the car out from the middle of the road so that traffic could flow. And then the wreck is over here, and y'all can handle that, and we can still get home. That is an anarchy example. When people freely work together without coercion in a voluntary manner, that's an example of anarchy. Some would debate that it's not. There's always going to be people who come in and say, no, that's not right. Well, I've done a lot of reading and research, and have been immersed in this philosophy for many years. So there you go.
That's a great simple example. I love that. When I think of anarcho-communism, and I don't know if that's the exact perfect book or definition of it, but like Tom Woods always talks about like studying the other side and seeing what the other side says, so you can better understand it and almost know it so well that you can even debate for the other side. So one of the books I started with was Utopia. When I read that book, and now when I started to understand anarcho-communism more, I'm like, oh, okay, that's probably what they envision in a perfect world. But like reading that book and being in 2021 now, I could see how that could work for a small town, but not an entire country. So the beauty of the things that I love about anarcho-capitalism is that you can have that small town, but not everyone's forced to live there. Like as long as people can voluntarily leave that town and voluntarily enter it, sure, once you're in that town, you obey by the rules of that town. But as long as you can voluntarily leave, and the entire country is a free society, I think that is a much, much better way to live, and much, much better approach.
For sure. And and when you have these conversations with people, a lot of times they kind of freak out and say, well, we can't do that. And it's like, just relax for a second, because we're not trying to start some kind of revolution and take over things and dismantle the government, and it's going to be some big bloody battle. Because what do we know about that? We know that the second you do that, someone far more despotic is going to come in and take things over. So the great thing about anarcho-capitalism and the voluntarist movement and Austrian economics, all three of those are very liberty-minded movements, right? the great thing about them is there's a ton of literature on it. There's so much literature on these subjects, far more than any other. And they have intricately detailed the fact that we have already had enough bloody revolution. We don't want that. We want a philosophical revolution.
Yeah.
We want people to accept this voluntarily. If they don't, then we're no different than our adversaries. So we want a philosophical revolution. And all we ask is that when you're discussing things with us, generally we've probably read more about your side than we've even read about our side. I was in a discussion with someone on Twitter. It was a short discussion about postmodernism, which I am very much so against. And one of the guys went, "Oh, well, we get it. You've never read any of the material." And it's quite the opposite. Because of school and college and all of that, I've actually probably read, not probably, but I know at least it's 50-50 I've had to read with postmodernist philosophy and thought behind it than, this more classically liberal, books and education. So a lot of times when we're having these discussions, we're very well read on the opposite side. And so what we ask for is I always say, listen, here's literature. I give out names of books. Just read this, and then get back to me. Yeah. Because a lot of times they haven't even ever heard of the term voluntarism or anarcho-capitalism. They've definitely not heard of Austrian economics. No. So before you knock it, just familiarize yourself and then get back to me.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of a very non-aggressive approach. And because as Larry Sharp says, you don't win people over by debating or arguing. You win people over by conversation. And
Absolutely.
then my buddy Brian Nichols always says, meet people where they're at. Like, figure out what is it that people care about, and just talk to those issues and just have a conversation about it. And kind of teach them from your perspective and what you learned. And really, we have conversations and you're patient and you listen. Maybe over time you might change someone's mind, because it's literally happening to me with my family. I mean, I've grown up being liberal and being a Democrat my entire life, and I thought that those are the good guys and everybody else is the bad guys. And the more I learned, the more and more I moved away from that, and I've just completely changed my mind about things. My family thought I was crazy for a while, and then 2020 happened, and I'm starting to explain some things from a different perspective. I'm not as aggressive anymore. I'm more patient. I'm a little more well-versed, and I explain even simple things like school choice, or what's the big one. I was just even like getting a license, what I mentioned earlier, like to be able to have a business, to get do the braid hair or to cut hair or whatever the business is. Just started explaining that to them from a free market perspective, and like, oh, okay, it's like all starting to click now. So it's also important that we educate ourselves a lot, because then it makes it easier to talk about those things.
And I find too that when you talk about these types of things, which are heavily involved in entrepreneurship, which is a great thing about Austrian economics. Generally with economics, especially mainstream economics, if you go to school, a lot of times you learn Keynesian economics, which is very centrally planned economics. The entrepreneur is never, ever mentioned once. And if there is one thing that I identify as, even more so than like musician or artist, it's entrepreneur.
Yeah. Every artist is a business.
Exactly. If you're a professional and you take it seriously, you're absolutely running a business. And so what is interesting is a lot of people who are so negative to any type of liberty-minded approach have not ever run a business, don't understand the entrepreneurial side of things. And they don't understand what that entails, and they don't understand that without entrepreneurs, we don't have anything.
Yeah. And especially small businesses, right? Small entrepreneurs, because I read something, I believe majority of the jobs in our country come from small businesses.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm a small business owner.
Yeah.
And with small businesses, I think that it's important to make the economy as small business friendly as possible. Yeah. And to your point earlier about licenses, well, what does that do? That disproportionately affects populations who they have this entrepreneurial idea, and it's a great idea. There's a market for it, there's a demand for it, they've done their research, they want to do it, but then they're inundated with all of these regulations, with red tape, with licenses they have to get. And it's absolutely ridiculous, and it disproportionately affects people. And that's been proven. So that's just a part of it, you know.
And it hurts the poorer populations more, because like someone might not be able to afford a license to go. I mean, I keep using the braiding hair example because it's one of the most ridiculous things, like to have a license to braid hair. I mean, if I can braid all my neighbors' hairs, like why do I need a license for that if they agree to come to me for that? I mean, because like the license, I might not be able to afford it depending what state I'm in. I mean, I think in New York it was like a few $1,000s just to
Yeah,
braid hair. And it's like you're
crazy.
hindering this person to start a business and help work themselves out of poverty. So not only does it keep people in poverty, but also now creates a black market. And
Mhm.
when you're operating the black market, then you are breaking the law. And now that creates force and coercion and putting peaceful people in cages.
Well, absolutely. And I actually, it's funny you mentioned black markets. When I was during this during the whole pandemic thing, um, when people would ask me, well, just in like a hypothetical scenario, well, what happens if they're only allow, if vaccine passports take place and they only allow people to go to shows with who've been vaccinated? And I told him, like, well, you'll find me on the black market. Black markets are free
Yeah.
markets,
Yeah.
okay?
Yep.
So you'll find me there, and that's a risk I will take. I am willing to go to the end of the line.
Same.
And I know a lot of people can't because they have children and they have to think about them. I don't have children. I don't have to think about them. And I have been very frank with people. I'll take it to the end of the line, and I will defend every decision I make because it is from a standpoint of liberty and human flourishing and autonomy, which is highly, highly important. But a big thing that I wanted to touch on from your remarks about the licensing and everything, a lot of people don't realize how much the economic policies we have disproportionately affect lower and middle class people.
Oh yeah.
For instance, inflation. If inflation is happening, which it is right now,
Yeah.
if you're
Bad.
already wealthy, you're fine. That's
Right.
okay. That can actually, some wealthy people view that as a good thing. But if you are lower or middle class and you're on a fixed income, or you don't have any savings, or you make enough to pay your bills but don't have excess left over, inflation is going to disproportionately affect you because it devalues the dollar. It restricts your purchasing power in a huge kind of way. And so these policies, not based on sound money at all, disproportionately affect those populations. And that's a really tough thing to try and teach people, because they've been so ingrained to think that, oh, these policies, all the news has to say is it's going to help poor people. And a lot of people are like, well, the news said it's going to help poor people. It's like, but is it really? If you really actually look at it, is it going to? And the answer, if they're printing money and practicing credit expansion and artificially propping up the economy, then actually, no, it is not in the long run. Enjoy the free money you get now, because in years later, it's going to disproportionately affect people on fixed incomes with lower incomes in a very negative way.
Yeah. And I mean, and I want to encourage people to, when they hear on TV, it's good for the poor people. That should be like immediately red flag. Go look this up, because if it takes a piece of legislation, a bill that's hundreds of pages or maybe even over 1,000 pages, there might be something fishy in there. It's
Oh
not
gosh,
just
yeah.
a bill that's helping us and giving us a $1,200 check. I mean, even with all the things that are just wrong with that in general, if you go through to some of these bills, there's a lot of stuff that is getting passed right under our nose. Places we're sending money that weren't even affected by the pandemic, and we're paying for that. And that is inflating our dollar, and that's making our dollar worth less. So if you're, maybe middle class and you're got a little bit money left over at the end of the month, like a couple of $100, that inflation plus increased prices can now send you from barely like getting by to now being paycheck to paycheck, and then you
Absolutely.
miss a paycheck and now you're on the streets.
Mhm.
It just messes everything up just more and more.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of mirroring with history with what we're going through currently. And this is not a partisan political thing. This is just across the board. This is
Yeah.
just politics, period, right? I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, this guy's doing it better. That no, across the board, if you look at history and you study two different civilizations, the Weimar Republic in Germany, pre-World War II, and then you study the fall of Rome, you will see how much those two societies, especially their economic policies, mirror what we are doing right now, and how much their philosophy mirrors us right now, which is just terrible, terrible philosophy. So those two things. There's I can't remember the exact name of the book. I think Mises Institute has it, but it's Hyperinflation Germany. Is part of the name of the book, and it's the years right before World War II, when it started in Europe, not here. And I mean, it is just uncanny how, I mean, they're printing money just for the heck of it. They devalued their marks so much that they had to come up with new marks that were huge. And they were trying to just pay all these reparations they could not pay. I mean, the list goes on and on. And the war reparations from World War One. So they were doing all of these things. People, other countries started dropping the mark as assets, as investment assets. You see that happening here, with foreign countries dropping the dollar in favor of another one. So I try and not be too like doom and gloom about things, but I also don't want to mislead anyone and make them think that everything's okay. It's because it's not. So I just kind of tell people, look, it's do your research, right? Don't just listen to me, or don't just listen to an authority figure within the Austrian economics community, like a Per Byland. Don't just take it at face value. They want you to do your research. They want you to see for yourself the things they're saying, so yeah, that's the approach.
I mean, just when it comes to like politics and like say elections in general, right? For a libertarian to run as a candidate, I mean, they're gonna really have to know their stuff. Like they're really gonna have to be very well educated and well versed, because libertarians are not gonna vote for that person if they don't. And what I love about this movement too is like we actually have NOTA on the ballot, which means for none of the above. So if you suck, like you could lose to none of the above, which has happened. So that's just what I love about this movement too. Like everyone is so educated, and like I'm still new to learning a lot of this stuff, but so like when I have conversations, it's really inspiring. I want to keep asking questions and dive super deep. And I mean, 90 minutes went by so fast. But yeah, I mean, people in this world are really educated, and sometimes that's going to be hard as a newbie, because you feel like you're being attacked or everything that you think is being challenged. But I just want to encourage people to be patient and to dive through some of the stuff, and maybe look at some of the things that you've mentioned, those recommendations.
Yeah, and I will say too about any type of movement. Like I was heavily involved in the anarcho-capitalist side of things. But since I've really transitioned into the Austrian economics side of things, simply because what I was finding is, like you mentioned, with groups on social media. So I was a part of a couple really big groups, and cap groups. And what I would find is you would get so many people in there who are just trying to sabotage everything, and everyone was just kind of warring with each other, from a verbal standpoint, a war of ideas, so to speak. It wasn't, so just because you have a group of people that have this philosophy doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with each other.
Oh yeah.
I personally love witnessing Austrian economists argue with each other. It is the most highbrow, like, insults you'll ever hear. And it is awesome. But yeah, so just because like we all, there's a group of us who are like, oh, we love Austrian economics, it doesn't mean we're going to agree with every single thing, especially with like the cryptocurrency and gold debate. That's a huge rift. So yeah, to your point, don't get discouraged. And I'll also say, if there's a group that is sucking your joy, leave them. I
completely agree.
Don't align yourself with a group or a business or a title. Align yourself with a philosophy or a cause. And then there's freedom in that.
Yeah, I like that. That's really, really good advice. I'm gonna throw in a couple quick rapid fire fun questions. Let's change the topic a little bit. But when you think of the word successful, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Oh gosh, we've been talking about Mises forever, so that was the first person that came to mind.
That makes sense.
But it's true. I mean, he fled Nazism, came here penniless, and now look at him. He's a legend. So
yeah, that's a good one. I like it. What are the books, documentaries, or podcasts you share the most?
Oh, that's a really good one. Oh yeah. Economics for Business. It's a podcast on Mises Institute. Hunter Hastings hosts it. He has a lot of great guests. What I love about that podcast is they go into theory, but it is directly applicable to your business, no matter what kind of business owner you are. I have learned so much from that podcast and have been able to apply it to decision making and strategy and execution with my business. So Economics for Business.
I like it.
At Mises Institute. I'm trying to think of some other podcasts, because I listen to that one religiously. The second a new episode's out, I queue it up. And it's a really good one.
It's a new one I'm going to add to my massive list of podcasts. Thank you.
Yeah.
Never ending.
Oh, Bob Murphy show. Bob Murphy.
I've heard about him.
Yeah. Oh, Tom Woods, obviously his pod. I mean, oh my goodness, that's just, I'll get an email notification like it's 12 a.m. and he's got a new podcast up. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not going to bed for an hour. Bob Murphy's podcast is really great as well. He has a ton of different guests on, from everything from business and finance and investing to Austrian economics to philosophy that we've discussed today. So Tom Woods, Bob Murphy, and Economics for Business.
Awesome. I love it. What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Man, I've gotten so much good advice. One comes to mind. I have great parents who are geniuses. And I was talking to my dad one evening. We have both of my parents are super fun to have like really like in-depth philosophical conversations with. And we don't agree on everything either. It's like another example of like, we have all these conversations, we don't always agree. But anyway, so I was talking to him and it was just kind of a funny moment. This was several years ago. And I was a huge fan of Taco Bell. I just like, that was like my after gig food for like the longest time, it's, you got to eat dinner. And so I was like, man, it would be great to own a Taco Bell franchise.
Yeah.
And I said, but that's like, gosh, I think you need like $1 million or something like, overall to be able to invest. So I was like, yeah, that's not really
wild on the road.
Yeah, that's not really something. It's like a pipe dream. That's not really something I'm going to be able to do. And it just kind of paused and looked at me. He was like, shoot for the stars, kid. I was like, okay. Like, what was so cool about that moment was because my dad is a very, he's a really rational person. Every decision he makes is a really rational decision. He's not going to make a decision just based on pure emotionalism. So when he said that, what that told me is he believes in me enough that I could one day own a Taco Bell franchise.
I love it.
And that I could, if I put my mind to it and put the work in and the sweat, then yeah, shoot for the stars, kid. Like, don't limit yourself. And that really stuck. And I think about that sometimes when I get a little bit of like imposter syndrome happening, like, am I really supposed to be here? Do I really deserve this? Like, I remember that.
I love it. Two thoughts from that. So Orlando, we have I haven't been yet, but just opened Taco Bell Cantina.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So can't wait to go to that. So basically
is
Taco Bell
that
with
like
a bar.
Oh, it's like a bar too?
Yeah.
Woo.
So you can.
I'm going to be in Orlando in October for my birthday for the 2000th episode of the Tom Woods show filming.
Oh, fun. Yeah. I'll be going there too.
Yeah. Oh, fun.
Yeah.
We'll have to connect.
Yeah.
We'll have to go to the cantina.
I had to go in the cantina. I like it. And then the other thought I had is I hope, so I have a 15-month-old. I hope that my kid one day is going to talk about how he has so many awesome conversations with his parents.
Yes.
I think that's really
I'm
cool.
sure he will. I'm sure he will. You are a very, this is our first time actually having like an in-depth conversation, but I am absolutely sure he will. You are a very awesome, knowledgeable, like liberty-minded, just, I can totally tell like just how passionate you are about all the things we've been chatting about. So I'm sure that'll happen for sure.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then what is something you'd like to see change about our music industry?
The philosophy. I know I keep going back to it, but I mean, it's for real. Every single decision we make is directly from the philosophy that we follow. And Tom mentioned it on his show. I had emailed him because he was like, well, send me some points, you want me to make in regards to why you started the free market musician. And I told him, look, I just see this philosophy that is rampant in the arts industry and the music industry that's destructive to the individual. You're sacrificing yourself for this group think, and it's so destructive. And no good art can come from that. No art worth remembering, a century down the road. So the to promote a philosophy of individualism in the music industry, I think is just so important.
Completely agree. I love that. And then what is the best place for people to go and connect with you and find out more about what it is you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll point them to a couple different places. If you want to know more about my group, the Crazy Daysies, that I perform with my sister, we're on Facebook at Rebecca Day and the Crazy Daysies. We're everywhere else too, but that's a big hub. So Rebecca Day and the Crazy Daysies on Facebook. And then for my free market musician, Rebecca Day music stuff, like my other brand that I focus on, I'm on Twitter at Rebecca Day Music, and things get fun on there. So Rebecca Day Music on Twitter.
I love it. So before I ask you the last question, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show, sharing some of the lessons from your music career, and then also sharing a lot of lessons from your Liberty career, or your Liberty, I don't know what you would call it, career or inspiration, and what it is you're putting out there in the world through social media, through your music, and even through the free market musician website, because you have a blog with it too, with a lot of great articles. I skimmed it today before we started talking, and just looked at some of the headlines, and I was like, wow, I'm gonna like read all this because it seems very relevant to the music industry from a free market perspective. So thanks so much for what it is that you put out in the world.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for having me today. This has been so fun. And let me just say, this has been such a unique experience. This is the first podcast I've done, and really the first conversation that I've mentioned Austrian economics, individualist philosophy, and tied it all back to the music industry. So that was just an amazing experience. So I am so thankful.
Oh, I love it. And that time went by so fast. I'm looking at the clock like, whoa, wow, be respectful over time. But
oh, you're totally fine.
The question I ask everyone at the end is, what's your definition of making it?
Oh gosh, I love that question. You have amazing questions. My definition of making it is just what Howard Roark said in the Fountainhead. My work done my way. So making a living and supporting my family while staying true and authentic to my art done my way.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rebecca Day. Again, to learn more about Rebecca Day, go to freemarketmusician.com. I'll also share all of her social media links in the show notes that you can find in the description of the YouTube channel or on the website makingitwithchrisg.com. Thank you all so much for listening and for all the support. Please share this episode on social media, tag us, use the hashtag making it. And until next time, spread love, positivity, and joy in the world and live the life you love. Peace, my friends. Live the life you love.